Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a long one, so buckle up. I'm in the middle of making my new studio album, which I plan to release later this year. And today we're gonna check out how I work on a song with chords, structure, sounds, arrangement, why I mix the way I do, how I mix drums, bass, synths, guitars, a lot of stuff, and hopefully this will be some inspiration, and maybe it can boost some creativity. And some of you watching, many of these things I'm working on are related to the 80s. Some are related to just making music, goes for any decade really in terms of what you're doing. This video is not about gear, it's about ideas. I will use vintage synths, I will use sampling machines, I will use software, I will use electric guitars and electric basses and all sorts of stuff to make the ideas happen. It's all about getting a song to work and following a vision. And when you do that, gear doesn't matter as much as you might think. So let's break this down. And first of all comes, of course, the song itself. Chords and melodies are the most important part of any music production. Okay, so here we are inside the DAW. This is a work in progress. It's not finished by any means. Let me play you what I have so far. Let's go. That was the intro part, verse coming up. Pre-chorus, and chorus, which is the same as the intro. And back to the intro part. And we're back to the verses again. So we had a lot of stuff going on here. We had guitar parts. Some of these guitar parts are actual electric guitars. Those two tracks here among them. A real Strat played by me. Some are samples, and some are, bits and pieces from everywhere. We have synths, and as I told you in the very beginning of the video, the gear is not important here. The ideas are, and good sounds can come from anything these days. All the synths released these days are capable of doing great stuff. You can use vintage synths, which I have here. I have the D50, the Kawai K3. I have things from Nexus 5. I have my TAL sampler doing stuff. I have all kinds of, sounds coming from everywhere. And for the bass, I have a TAL sampler bass, which is a recording of the MFB Dominion 1. I have real electric bass played by me. I'll come back to that shortly. And I have some sub bass from a plugin. So again, a mix and match of old and new, tech and non-tech. And for the drums, well, I don't use drum machines anymore. I use samples, and some are taken from old drum machines, some are taken from sample libraries, some are my own custom samples, and in total that makes up the drums. So where to start? Well, I think we'll start with the chords and the chord structure and how I've made the different parts with the key changes and everything, which is very important to me. So let's have a look at the chords and the chord structure first. Let's check out the chorus first, and the chorus is the same as the intro, and it's in the key of B. So I start with a E major 7, followed by a D sharp minor with F sharp in the bass, and the G sharp minor. I alternate throughout the song with a B chord with the E bass instead. It depends. The chord graphics here interprets my B chord with E bass as a major 7 suspended 2. It adds more texture by doing the B chord, I think, to the overall feel. What do you think? It all depends on what I'm going after or going for, and it's also relevant to the what top line I have going for the vocals, which this will eventually be a vocal-based pop song. By having the top line, top note of the chord not the same as the top line of the melody, you actually add one more note to the chord instead. So if the top line, melody line, is doing that one, by doing this chord instead, moving that to an octave below, you have 4 notes total in the chord, sort of. When the top line, melody line, is doing the same as the top note of the chord. So this is something I often live by, trying not to layer my chords so they mess with the melody line when it comes to the top note of the chord. Don't have to do this, but I think you'll find that you add more texture and depth to the overall feel by following this rule. Of course, if you're doing the chords, making the song, the structure, the arrangement, without knowing what the melody line will eventually be, let's say you're just making the backing track and another vocalist or artist or producer is making the top line, then of course you can't know where the top line will be. And in those cases, it might be you might be limited in terms of choice, and you just have to go by what you think feels good. So for this tutorial, this video example, I'm just gonna layer my chords the way I think sounds good here and there, and I might change those chords a little bit later, the chord inversions, to fit the vocal melody line later. So if you play a little bit of the top line as well, of the intro part that is. So moving on to the verse. So after I lay the final G sharp minor at the end of the chorus, I go straight into a new key. So let me just dial that in on the graphics here. We're going from the B key to a B flat. So we go down a step, a half note in terms of song key, and we're now in the key of B flat. So I go from that G minor 7, G sharp minor 7, which is now a flat minor 7 in this new key. And we go straight into the B flat. Again, the graphics interpret that F chord with the flat B bass as a flat B major 7 suspended 2. E flat with a B flat bass. And I layer down the E flat at the end of the, as the last chord here. And now we go into a new key again for the pre-chorus. And for the pre-chorus, we go into the D flat key, which has a lot of flats here, but let's do it. So we have the... And we go into the D flat chord. And the G flat, with holding the D flat bass. And a B flat minor, and A flat suspended fourth, and A flat. So we have... And we end the pre-chorus by preparing for the chorus by doing a B and a D flat. And the question is this chord really a B or is it a C flat? But I layer those two chords at the end to really prepare for the chorus, which is that E major 7 that we looked at before. E major 7. Those last two chords here, I sort of stole that idea and chord structure, two chords, from Eric Carmen's Hungry Eyes from Dirty Dancing, if you're really vigilant in your observation of what I'm doing here. Anyways, those are the chords I've come up with so far, the chord structure, and let's go back into the arrangement and see how it goes. Okay, so that were the chords. One thing I always do when I make a song, I always record a lot more than I end up using. I read an interview with Tom Bailey from the Thompson Twins once, and he said the same thing. It's part of his creative process to record all the ideas he gets, and he usually strips away a lot of those recorded parts, and he is left with what makes up the final track as you hear it on the records. And I do pretty much the same thing. I record a lot more stuff than I end up using. I get ideas, I get creative, I get inspiration, and I just record it. And sometimes the last thing I recorded is a stayer. Sometimes the last thing I recorded will be gone by the end of the production. But I never know what I'm going to use. And so I keep everything until it's time to start to strip things away. Usually when the vocals are recorded. When the vocals come on top, a lot of things has to go because it gets in the way of the vocals. So after I have a skeleton of the song in terms of intro, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, as I just went through, I start to assemble sounds and start working on the arrangement. And to me, when I work like that, I usually start with drums and bass and a simple 3-harmonic chord structure, doing triads to sort of build it up from there. And usually I make a kick drum pattern first of everything. So let's check out what I've done on the drums for the kick. If you paid attention when you listen to it, we can take it from the beginning here. I wanted to have that sort of bass line, bass pattern, very simple in this song, something I really wanted from the get-go. And therefore I had to make sure that the kick drum played a similar pattern. So I started to lay down some kick drum samples in this pattern. So the bass is doing 2 hits. And the kick drum is doing 3 hits. So I play the bass on the same as the first kick and the second kick. And the sustain of the bass is going over that third kick hit. That way I get a sort of snappy feel to the attack. Each bar is having a sort of snappy attack. And the snare is doing its, 2 and 4. And the snare is made up of 2 different snares. A sort of a little bit crackly, it has a lot of top end. And the second one, more high-pitched, more in terms of mid-frequencies, so it'll make the snare sound more meaty. If I mute that second snare, the sounds very weak, but with that second snare, so not too much in terms of reverb either. The reverb is taken care of with that clap snare which comes in every now and again. That has a lot of reverb on it. And when it comes to reverbs, I'm basically using this as the main reverb. On this track, it's a Valhalla Vintage Verb, very nice hall with custom settings, which I like. Makes it a clean, lush reverb. And I've actually filtered out a lot of the high end of the reverb tail here because I don't want my reverbs to be too bright. And I use this reverb, like I said, on pretty much everything that needs that whole reverb. For delays, I'm more often than not using the H delay from Waves. I think that's a great delay, and I used it pretty much on everything. So I pretty much build up the drum pattern drum by drum, starting with the kick, adding some snares. If I have any snare or clap fills, I usually add them straight away, so I get a little bit of pattern going, which are pretty much repeated for every measure here. And then I start putting together some hi-hats. By the way, I high pass the kick a little bit, I filter it a little bit, so I take out from below 40 Hertz, but it starts way up here, so it takes away more than just below 40 Hertz. And that's to not interfere too much with the bass, which I wanted to have sort of kind of deep in the song. You had bass in the 80s that went pretty deep. Much of it had to be rolled off because of the pressing of vinyl records. But you had a little bit of bass, sub-bass in some tracks, some more than others. And on this track, I wanted to go a little bit towards the deeper end of the bass. It also goes pretty low with its lowest bass note. I'll get back to that shortly, but I wanted to have a little bit more bass in this than I usually have, and therefore I can't have both the kick and bass at the same time fighting for the same low frequencies, so I had to filter out the kick a little bit and put emphasis on the bass itself. So I build up some kick, some snare, which is also filtered a little bit, one of them, and the clap snare, which is also pretty much filtered out, a lot actually, because I don't want it to interfere too much with that more energy impacted snare here. And then I make a little bit of hi-hats, and I have actually 4 different tracks going at once here. 2 with hi-hats and 2 with shakers. So let's check them out. The hi-hat first. Kind of mix of hi-hat and shaker perhaps. Here's a plain hi-hat. And I have delays on that one. So it's a little bit more alive, a little bit of reverb as well. And I have 2 shaky parts panned left and right. Again with some delays and reverbs, and these have very little in terms of a high end, so they won't interfere with those 2 other more hi-hats. So that's the hi-hat pattern, and pretty much the stuff like here are the things I start building up straight away. So I have a sort of end result in mind when it comes to the bare bones of the drum tracks. So kick, snare, claps, and hats, shakers. That's what I make straight away. So I have something to go on when I layer down arpeggios or bass parts, so it won't interfere too much. So that's that. The crashes, nothing too fancy about that. I have 2 different crashes. One very low in the mix with lots of reverb on it. And one more high-pitched with also reverb on it, but it dies out faster, and these 2 combined make up the crashes throughout the song. Like that. And you heard some toms as well. I have, I think I have a low tom here as well. It comes in later. Yeah, so that's basically the drums for this, and the fills, etc. I'll come back to that later when we get to the pre-chorus and chorus. So let's close off the drums for now and have a look at the bass. And I have 3 different basses going at once. And there's actually a lot to go through here, so let's dig in. First of all, I have my main bass part, and this is coming from the TAL sampler. This is my own sample of the MFB Dominion 1 analog mono synth. And the reason I use sample bass more than anything is that when you sample a bass, especially from a analog bass synth, when you sample that, you get a much more consistent bass sound when you walk through the different notes. When you go down an octave or up an octave, the perceived loudness, energy stays pretty much the same throughout. And that makes it very capable of cutting through other instruments, which is necessary to actually hear the bass sound, especially on mobile phones or smaller speakers, which a lot of people are listening to these days. If you want your bass to come through in your mix, you have to have a consistent bass sound. You can, of course, do a lot with compression and limiting, but nothing beats the way a sampled bass cuts through. So I'd much rather have this MFB Dominion 1 bass sound sampled than use it directly from the synth itself. It's much, much better for this kind of music to have that sampled. And we did, and they did exactly the same thing in the 80s. Why do you think so many bass lines in pop music from the 80s were sampled? Yes, because it gives the bass sound much more consistency. Everything from the bass from Western Girls, Pet Shop Boys, to the DX basses of Stock Aitken Waterman, they really cut through. The DX is a digital synth, of course, and you'll have much more consistency in the bass sound coming from a digital synth like the DX7. So that's the same thing as sampling a analog synth, an analog synth. So I'm using that TAL sampler bass. If I take off my bass filtering, You can hear it has more bass than I'm using here, but I only wanted the upper part of the energy spectrum for that bass sound, because I wanted to add the sub part or the lower part of the bass frequencies from another synth. And let's check out what I've done here. I have one synthetic bass sound, sub bass sound. Again, it has consistency in its register, but it has very little top end, of course. It only has the lower end. And it also has a little bump in the beginning of each attack, which is important together with the tal sampler bass. So that's all well and good, but I have one more bass here, and that is my electric bass, the Squire bass, which I'm playing, by the way, and my bass skills are not great, but they doesn't have to be in this case, because these are very low in register, and they're not supposed to be heard very much. They're supposed to be felt together with those two other synth bass sounds. And another thing I also do here is that I sidechain these electric basses. I once knew a girl that was very much into sidechaining, but I'll save that story for another time. Today, let's check out how I've sidechained that electric bass to that tal sampler. I have a copy of my tal sampler track up here, and that forms the basis of the sidechaining. This is not going out any stereo output, so this is muted out. But the electric bass has a gate on it. And that gate, by enabling, this is in Cubase or Nuendo, and in Nuendo, you have to sidechain by pressing that button here, activate sidechain. And by messing with the threshold and the attack and release, I'll pump this electric bass through the gate here, so it only opens up when the tal sampler bass is playing, so that you will not hear the electric bass unless there's activity going on with the mother track, the tal sampler track. So that's one way to sidechain a track to another, and by playing with the attack time, I can sort of take off a little bit off of the attack of the electric bass, so it won't attack at the same time as the tal sampler. And another way you can make that happen is to have all these electric basses delayed a little bit on the timeline. So I delay them by 5 milliseconds as well, with low energy sounds like low sub bass. You can't really determine how fast it's coming through the speakers, how fast it's pumping up or pumping out that air. So by delaying this a little bit, you can also reduce the attack, so it won't interfere with the attack of that, especially that tal sampler, which has that attack you're supposed to hear. So that's how I sidechain my electric bass to the tal sampler. So we can hear how that sounds in isolation. This is without sidechaining. With sidechaining. You can hear the little glide there. So let's hear them all together. Without the electric bass. You can hear it without the sub bass. And with the drums. It's all about creating the right energy for the whole mix. So what we're doing here is really mixing the song as we go along. This is what everyone does working in the DAW these days. You sort of mix the track as you go along. The days when you mixed everything at the end from a raw set of recorded files, those days are over. When you work on a track in the DAW from the beginning now, you mix as you go along. So when you're pretty much finished making the song in the DAW, your mix is also ready. But as I go along, I will adjust the levels of these bass tracks together with the kick drum constantly throughout working on the track to get the right balance. So this will be an ongoing process up until the very end, of course. So that's the bass, pretty much. And let's have a look at the synths. And now we're starting to get somewhere. I have a lot of stuff going on here. And as I said, these parts are coming from all kinds of stuff, vintage synths, plugins, digital, analog, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is to find the right sound for the track, and that can come from anything. So let's go into the intro again and break it down and see what I've done so far and my thought process. Okay, so what have we got going here? We have this sound. That's the bell sound from the intro. I also have it here. So the first one was from a DX piano from the Nexus 5 plugin. And it's recorded as audio from my second setup here. If you remember a little while back, I showed you a video where I told you how I record my VST synths like they were hardware. So I'm going out, I'm triggering the MIDI inside the plugin here, and I'm recording the outputs of the Yamaha DM3, which this is hooked up to, recording the output of the Yamaha DM3 into this DAW you're looking at here. So I'm recording it as any other hardware synth. But I do have some plugins going as well. I have a duplicate of that part coming from the Tal Uno 62 plugin, which is running inside this very DAW. And this could, of course, have been done on my hardware Juno 106, but this sound here was more than good enough for that. So I just kept it like that. Here's another part. Same pattern, same melody line with a little bit of LFO, vibrato going at the end there. So these three different parts make up the bell intro melody line. And what's important here is that these three parts, they're played and recorded, maybe not recorded, but they're played back in mono. You can't have all the sounds in a 80s mix in stereo. Well, you can, of course, but if you listen to the type of music I'm trying to mimic here, late 80s, early 90s pop music, a lot of sounds are in mono. The stereo effect coming from these sounds are the stereo reverbs or stereo delays, but the sounds themselves are in mono, especially those type of bell sounds and stuff like that. You can have the pads in stereo instead, so the pads will wrap over the mono sounds. So I have the bell sounds in mono with a stereo reverb going over them, and I have the pads in stereo instead. And while we're talking about bell sounds or pad sounds in the background, do you really think that a $5,000 analog synth, vintage or modern, would make any difference at all in this track, as I'm showing you here? Of course not. Of course, alone at your sequential or Moog shrine, worshipping your feet off, The $5,000 synth will undoubtedly sound massive and fat, and the more you worship, the fatter it will be. But in the mix, do I care if it's a free plugin synth or a $5,000 synth? I don't care. Do the listener care? No, the listener don't care at all. The listener cares about the music and how the music makes them feel. They couldn't care less whatever gear you used.
Mantra.
And as always, synths must be high-passed, especially pads and stuff like that. You have no need for things below 100, 200 hertz in those instruments. They will only mud up your mix if you don't high pass them. So high pass everything when it comes to synths. That's my mantra. Since this synth here is going in MIDI in real time, it's not been rendered out as audio as of yet. I have the high passing on the plugin itself at another place in the DAW structure here, but this is high passed as well. So we have the pads, and I have the bells in the intro. Okay, coming to the verse, and here we change key, if you remember from the chord structure segment earlier. And here I go over to another pad sound in the verse here. So let's check that out. This time it's from the Kawai K3. I had the D50 in the intro here. So let's check out the Kawai part. But I actually add in a little bit of D50 here as well, admittedly. So that's pretty much the chord sounds of the verses. And again, the top line has not been added here, so I might have to go back and re-record these parts if I have too much interference with the top line from the top note of these chords. For now, let's just keep them as they are. Okay, here we had another little thing coming in, a bass sound from my latest library for the Prophet X, actually a guitar sound I made, but it serves as a bass sound here, a little bass fill. Again, filtered a little bit to not interfere with the real bass. And let's see what we're doing in the drums here. I had a little break towards the end of the intro. The kick drum pattern is going as before. I've muted a little bit of the hats here. The bass pattern is pretty much the same. Okay, so here a lot of things happened. Let's go back and check what it's doing. Okay, so from here on, at the end of the first verse, going into the pre-chorus, I start to add ear candy. Different kinds of ear candy. It's in the arrangement and it's in the sounds and the usage of sounds. And the first thing was those triangle hits you heard here. Instead of doing a snare break or tom break, I did a little subtle thing with some triangles. Very efficient because the high energy, high frequency register of those triangles really cuts through and prepares us for the next section. I also have a little shaker here, which I will or won't be using. Let's hear how it sounds. Let's mute that for now. Again, recording more than I might end up needing. But going into the pre-chorus, I also start adding congas, some percussion. And it's a key change again, so the listener is taken onto a new journey. building up tension, building up texture. So let's check out what's happening here. And not only that, I'm doing a little variation on the kick drum pattern here as well. It's not the same as it's been before. Again, the listener won't notice everything, of course, at the same time, nor is he supposed to. He's supposed to listen to the song. But on the subconscious level, the listener will pick up on all those small little details, and it'll be more satisfied when listening to the song because there is something happening, although we can't hear every detail. Very important, I think. The congas. Not too much going on, but we can isolate them and see. There are 3 types of congas or bongos or whatever you want to call them. I just call them congas. And some rim shots. Let's enable the kick as well so you can hear it. Some delays. Pannings are important here. So we have very little in terms of long reverbs. I have gated reverbs, and I have delays, especially on the rim shots here, which are from the 808, I think. So ear candy for the listener and satisfaction to me for being able to work on small details, which I love. And in the synth department, we also had stuff going on, so let's check out. So now we're starting to add a little bit of arpeggios here. I think I'll do some phasing or flanging on one of these arpeggios, maybe a little bit of stereo spread as well. I don't have a nice flanger installed on this DAW here. I have a much better flanger on my 64-bit system. This is a 32-bit system. I have a much better flanger on my 64-bit system, so I will probably export out one of these arpeggiated parts and run them through a nice flanger and import them back here. But for now, this will do. So in addition to that, I have some D50 again. JX8P soundtrack coming from not the PG8X, but coming from my Prophet X, which I've used to sample the original JX8P I had with the soundtrack patch. There we have the phased Solina from the, I think it's from the Arturia V collection. So these 5 parts at the end here, in addition to some bells again from the Nexus 5 plugin. Originally, I had recorded these parts as well. But I felt that I should save those 2 in the middle, or that one in the middle, for that second pre-chorus instead. But I might change my mind later, again, depending on how the vocals are coming along. So let's see what we have so far then. Not much else here in terms of synths. Let's play that from the beginning. that little Dirty Dancing build up towards the chorus. So that's the verse and pre-chorus in terms of synths. And what we've not listened to so far then is some of the guitars. And I have the guitars coming in at the pre-chorus here. So let's unmute everything and listen to it in total. These two guitars here, left and right. And that's a little tip for you. Using guitars, even if you have them in small amounts, can really make a difference to the feel of the track. It sounds much, much more authentic when you're doing 80s pop music. If you have some guitars in there, it can be strumming a acoustic guitar or electric guitars, or just some attacks at the start of sections, etc. Have some of that and you'll have a much, much more authentic 80s feel. And here comes the chorus, same as the intro part, without the bells which are coming in on the second part of the chorus. So when I start the chorus here, I continue with the congas and stuff like that. So I have some tom and snare fills at the beginning of the intro. The bass parts are pretty much the same pattern as before, so there's nothing happening there in terms of fills or anything. They're just doing their part to tug along. I start the chorus with my own Strat fill here, just a simple chord. That's it. And I add a plucking from the Nexus 5. Very simple, just a repeating pattern, but combined with everything. And we're repeating the chorus now with the intro part, the bells and everything. And I put those guitars in again, and I continue with that plucking. And I also add a third guitar here, which is the same guitar I used on Those Days, for instance. And we're into the second verse, and here I add a fourth guitar, again from the Nexus, doing some plucking on the verse bit. And here I have that bass fill in the verse, but now I've added some DX pianos as well to really cement the 80s feeling in terms of fills. And I also steal a bar here and there at the end of each section of the second time. So at the end of the second verse and second pre-chorus and second chorus, I steal a bar or two to really propel the song along and sort of getting to the point faster. The listener has already heard the ending of the parts in the first round, the suspended fourth, etc., lingering on. You don't have to hear that again on the second part. So again, using all the tricks in the book to make this a proper 80s pop song with all its characteristics. Yeah, I added this when I was working on the song. I'm not sure I'm going to go into a sort of stripped down chorus bit again here. This is probably going into a bridge, which I haven't made at all so far. So what will happen from here on, it's in the blue right now. I don't know that myself. But the structure, the bones of the song is now in place. Many of the song sounds are in place. I have what I need to finish it now in terms of the arrangement of the instruments. And as you saw, mixing the song as we go along is happening in real time as we work on the song. Sounds are filtered, compressed, put on reverbs, put on delays, etc. So I'm constantly shifting things around with the adjustments of that, but everything will probably sound like you're hearing it now in the final mix. I doubt there will be big changes in terms of sound or structure. As an idea, I have a sound here, a vocal sample chop, which I've used in the chorus parts just for fun, but let me play it to you and you can comment on it if you like, if you like the sound of this, or if you think it's too modern compared to the rest of the backing track. So that's a little fun thing I did in the chorus bits. Again, just for fun. I think I like it, I have to admit. I think it's cool. If it's authentic, I'm not so sure. Should I keep it? I'm not so sure. This is supposed to be a vocal track over here, of course, with lyrics, which means something to me. Maybe I'll put it below on the last verses, last choruses. I don't know. This will definitely be a fade chorus to fade. So I might put it in on the end there. Again, I don't know. And talking about filtering low frequencies and not interfering with each other, here is the Spectrum Analyser. One thing I use quite a lot is this Spectrum Analyser. This is a very cheap one. It's not accurate in any way. It's a cheap, fun one, but nevertheless, it can give us some valuable information about where the energy in the track lies for the different sections. So if you check out the synths first, remember I told you to high pass a lot to avoid muddiness in the low end. So let's play the synths from the beginning here and check out the Spectrum Analyser here. You should see no activity in the lower part at all from any instruments within the synth range. Let's check it out. And as you can see, there was no activity below 160 to 200 hertz. And most of the energy was around let's say 2 to 250 to upwards 500 hertz around there. So the energy of the synths lie around here, which is very important too. The loudness of the mid frequencies is what gives the track density and solidity, which is very important in terms of not having that smiley curve, which is not very pleasant to listen to. Another reason why the Yamaha NS10 monitors were so much used in the day, if you made it sound good there and they really pushed the energy towards the mid frequencies, if it made it sound good there, it would sound good on any system. So let's move on. Let's check out the bass here. The higher portion of the bass, the click and the attack, lies up here, but the low end, the meatiness of the bass, is between 40 and 50, so around here. So if we compare that to the drums, so you can see the kick and the lower end of the drums is around from 60 to 100, so the energy, including the kick, lies around here, while the bass was here. And again, very important, the kick and the bass do not interfere with each other, so you can hear the bass clearly. It cuts through with no muddiness up against the kick. Again, very important. Let's hear both at the same time. The side chaining of the electric bass is also important here. It doesn't interfere with the attack of the synth bass. So even though this is a cheap spectrum analyzer and it's not super accurate, it can give you a good visual indication of where your energy lies within the track. So the bass, the kick and the lower end, the low end toms and stuff like that is around here. Some drums around here, some percussion of course is up here, and the synths in the middle here. So you have clearly marked out sections where the energy of the drums and the bass and the synths is within the mix. So it's a very valuable tool, and I use this a lot to reference my mixes against commercial music from the time period I'm trying to match up. So I often play a song from the 80s, which is in a similar ballpark to what I'm doing on the Spectrum Analyzer here, and really see where the different frequencies lies. And I try to match my own sounds up towards my reference track. And another thing I really have to have going when I'm working on music, I know some swear by not having this on the stereo output when working, but I like to have it on, is my stereo bus compressor. I have the stereo bus compressor from the get-go. From the minute I fire up my DAW, I enable the bus compressor. I have to have that on. I like to hear how my mix is coming along with the bus compressor on. It never takes more than around 4 dBs, 3 to 4 dBs, and I use it in a standard classic way, nothing fancy here, but I like to have this on, so this is my preferred workflow. And the last thing I wanted to show you is my master stereo out. If you check out the meters here, what I'm concerned with is that the mix is not clipping, and I use my ears for that. I have this at 0 dB because I think this is the optimal way of having your gain structure within the DAW. I make sure that no plugins are clipping, but I always use my ears, not the meters. If it sounds good, it is good, no matter what the meter says. As for the levels in terms of uploading to streaming media, streaming platforms, I don't care about that at all. I upload my mixes when they sound good in my studio with the dynamics I want to have. If they sound low here or high here in terms of loudness or volume, I don't care. I upload them the way they sound when I think they sound the best. And listening back on streaming platforms, I've never heard my mixes sound inferior to anyone else's mixes at all, actually. In fact, I think my mixes sound better than most other mixes because my mixes have dynamics in them, while a lot of other people's mixes sound stale and pretty much brick-walled. I don't use brick wall limiting at all when I mix and master my music. I have my bus compressor, and that's that. So that's my take on that. Well, that pretty much wraps up this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. A lot of my mixing techniques, tips and tricks, things I've picked up from over 30 years doing this, really. And by the time you watch this video, the song might be finished. It might not. So if you have anything you want to add, please add it in the comments or send me an email about it. If you haven't watched it already, I have a almost 10-hour-long video series called A Song Is Born, which you can find here or check the video description for links, where I go in much more detail and depth than I did in the video here. So watch that if you want more. And if you ever had any doubts, I'm still the 80s. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.